part of your faces I can see behind the mask. It's an honor for me to introduce this session. We heard President Ferdinand Marcos marching orders during the SONA that he wants the PDP in his hands by the end of the year. So this NEDA plenary session will thresh out and will discuss and will flesh out the PDP from multiple viewpoints. So we have 3 speakers representing the government. Poor Dokoy Kapuno didn't have time for sandwiches and chips. But he'll be here. From the academe, Dr. Jeff Arapok, and the private sector, former Secretary Babe Singson. So what I will do right now is to have 3 speakers present each of their thoughts here, and they will have 10 minutes for their presentation, after which we will have a panel discussion and an open forum. So I will introduce the first speaker, Professor Dr. and Undersecretary Joseph Kapuno is the Undersecretary for Investment Planning of the National Economic and Development Authority, where he oversees the formulation of strategies for efficiency in linking the government planning, programming, and implementation of projects. He is also tasked to provide policy guidance in the project appraisal, monitoring, and evaluation of big-ticket infrastructure projects of the national government, formulation of development plans and policies, and programming the official development assistance, among others. Before his secondment to NEDA, Dr. Kapuno, or Dokoy to his colleagues, is a professor at the UP School of Economics and is the resident wine connoisseur who has a well-stocked basement, which he promises to empty one of these days. He has published research works on fiscal decentralization, healthcare utilization and financing, impact evaluation, and national growth and development. So let us welcome Undersecretary Dokoy Kapuno to present something about the PDP.
Thank you, Carl, for that generous introduction, especially that wine cellar that is non-existent. But since I am the Undersecretary for Investment Programming, I might consider that investing in. Yeah. Okay. Management Association of the Philippines President Rogelio Singson, Professors Jefferson Arapok, Carl, and Doc, of course, and once again to the guests present today, pleasant good morning. I am now again subbing in for the Secretary. Before we begin, I would like to thank the staff of the NEDA who worked hard to make this session possible. Today's event is important as it falls during the country's Economic and Financial Literacy Week. What better way is there to celebrate this week than to share with you our progress on the creation of the country's development blueprint for the medium term, which we call the Philippine Development Plan, or PDP. As you may already know, the NEDA is the primary agency tasked with the formulation of the PDP, a task that signifies one of our most significant responsibilities as a government agency serving the Filipino people. The PDP, after all, is the country's development blueprint or roadmap for the next few years. It will be an indispensable tool in defining our nation's path, as it contains assessments of sectoral constraints and challenges, identifies targets for the medium term, and outlines the strategies that we must pursue, including policies and legislative measures to meet our targets. The upcoming PDP 2023-2028 shall flesh out the 8-point socioeconomic agenda of the Marcos administration, which orients us to focus on short-term issues such as protecting people's purchasing power from inflation, as well as addressing socioeconomic scarring and reducing the vulnerability of the poor. In the medium term, the goal is to create more, better, and resilient jobs that will provide our people economic opportunities that can bring them out of poverty. The PDP is currently crafted to lay out a game plan that addresses pertinent issues in areas such as food security and agriculture, social protection, health, and education, fiscal management, international trade, infrastructure, industry, and manufacturing, services and connectivity, as well as good governance and public safety. We have also gathered experts to aid us in drafting of the plan and in constituting the advisory council so that we may develop the plan into its best possible version. The strategies and policies laid out in the PDP 2023 to 2028 are anchored on the Filipino people's collective vision, the AmBisyon Natin 2040. The AmBisyon Natin 2040 is a guidepost for the country's long-term development planning. It is a vision that was crafted before this term, having been an anchor for the government's plans since the time of the former President Aquino, and then again during the administration of former President Duterte, and now in the administration of President Marcos. The AmBisyon 2040 Natin articulates our nation's collective aspirations that we may all enjoy a stable and comfortable lifestyle, securing the knowledge that we have enough for our daily needs and unexpected expenses, that we can plan and prepare for our own and our children's future, that our families live together in places of our own, and that we have the freedom to go where we desire, protected and enabled by a clean, efficient, and fair government. In short, the ambition is that we may all live and achieve a matatag, maginhawa, at panatag na buhay by 2040. Naturally, because of COVID-19, the pace at which we were in the process of achieving the AmBisyon Natin 2040 was disrupted. The economic challenges we were facing prior to the global pandemic were exacerbated by the lengthy lockdowns and disruptions to the economy and the scarring on our human capital, as well as on small businesses, will likely have long-term negative implications unless these are addressed. Today, as we continue our economic recovery, even more and unprecedented economic challenges are erupting around the world, from the geopolitical conflicts between Ukraine and Russia, and as well as China and Taiwan, to the upward inflationary pressures caused by the supply chain disruptions. High inflation, particularly for food, is concerning since rapidly rising prices hurt the poor and the vulnerable the most. They are the ones who will not be able to cope with these developments unless they are provided assistance. Furthermore, recessions loom large as developed economies tighten their monetary policies worldwide, reducing the demand for exports and tourism. And so, with all these challenges, it is prudent and necessary to ask, is the AmBisyon Natin 2040 even still doable? The reality is that we have a lot of catching up to do if we want to ensure that we're not too delayed with the vision's targets. Although we remain confident that we can navigate through the headwinds we face, the challenges are indeed tough. The constraints that have long hampered our economy cannot easily be solved as they require significant investments and coordination among agencies and branches of the government to fix. Indeed, it will require at least 2 more decades of signaling our nation's strong commitment to reforms so that we can reach our goals by 2040 or so. Allow me briefly to touch on the point that is relevant to the discussion that will follow. Among the goals of the AmBisyon Natin 2040 is to realize a high-trust society with a strong sense of community. Trust, whether in institutions, leadership, and communities, reduces uncertainties that individuals and businesses face in their economic decisions. As we know, uncertainty is a critical element for decision-making, especially for long-term commercial and personal endeavors. Businesses want to be certain that the regulatory environment in the next few decades will be stable and predictable before they make large investment in big-ticket infrastructure projects. Individuals and families want to know that their futures are secure so that they can properly make decisions regarding their occupation or where they will reside, or even where they should contribute to nation-building efforts. A high-trust society reduces costs that are wasteful, those that are spent on rent-seeking activities, for example, or those that waste time, talents, and efforts. A high-trust society allows families and individuals to feel at ease in their communities as they feel secure that they can count on others to assist them in times of need and do what is good for society. High levels of trust facilitate nation building, as individuals and businesses are more willing to give their time and effort for a future that they have a stake in. Let me conclude by expressing my eagerness to see the fruits of all our coordinated efforts. As we have repeatedly said before, despite the economic challenges we face, there's still no compelling reason to believe why the Philippines cannot attain a matatag, maginhawa at panatag na buhay for all of our people. The combined efforts of the public and private sectors during the pandemic show us what we can collectively achieve. So long as we keep our priorities straight and continue to push for the most impactful and economically sound policies, I am certain that we will be able to achieve our socioeconomic targets for the next 6 years, as well as our long-term development aspirations. Again, thank you to the team that made this possible and for everybody for listening. I'm looking forward to the presentation and discussions that will follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusek Dokoy, for that very insightful message about the AmBisyon and PDP. If you still can't get enough of Dr. Capuno, Yusek Capuno, he will be back tomorrow in one of the sessions to present. Thursday, 1 to 2:30. So to hammer on that issue of trust, we have our next speaker, Dr. Jefferson Arapok. Dr. Arapok is an assistant professor at the Department of Economics, College of Economics and Management from the University of Los Baños. He was awarded the UPLB Outstanding Teacher Award for Humanities and Social Sciences in 2016. He is also a research fellow at the Center for Behavioral Economics, Society and Technology. He's also a co-founder and the managing editor of Usapang Econ, an advocacy project which aims to make economics fun and relatable to the general public. His research interests include topics on behavioral economics, such as nudging and pro-social behavior. He obtained his bachelor's in economics from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, his MA from the UP School of Economics, and his PhD from the University of Newcastle, Australia. So let us trust Dr. Arapok to give a very thorough presentation on trust. Jeff?
Thank you, Carl. So good day, everyone. So I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces. Some of my professors in UPLB, Department of Economics and UP School of Economics. Hello. So trust. So trust is an essential aspect of any human relationship, may it be a romantic or professional relationship, because trust ensures that social interaction can run smoothly, even without formal systems like formal contracts. In the context of society, variations in trusting behavior can be observed in how day-to-day activities are conducted. For example, in the Philippines, entering shopping malls is no different from entering an airport, right? With all the metal detectors and bag poking stuff, and we know that it's not the case for most Western countries where mall entrances are usually unmanned. The same thing is true for their self-checkout counters. Here in the Philippines, it's normal for groceries to have at least a cashier, right, and a bagger. But let's proceed to my personal favorite, our procurement system. I think half of the people in this room can relate to how tedious to work on government-funded research. It feels like you are already proven guilty of malversation, and proving otherwise feels like a waste of time and energy instead of just allotting it to your actual research. Actually, these personal observations, including my own experiences, inspired a chapter of my PhD dissertation. I was so curious if there is an actual measurement of these apparent differences in trusting behavior across different nations. And I came across the World Values Survey Interpersonal Trust Index. I was surprised to see that the Philippines recorded the lowest rating in the Asia Pacific region at 5.34%. And during that time, I was still studying in Australia. So I decided to make a cross-country comparison. Australia recorded an interpersonal trust rating of 54.43%. So it means that the Philippines recorded a trust rating of more than 10 times lower than Australia. According to the existing literature on interpersonal trust, trust can be classified into two. So we have the localized trust and the generalized trust. So localized trust is a person's ability to trust their close social circles like family members, friends, neighbors. In contrast, generalized trust is a person's ability to extend their trust to the general group of people, like for example, foreigners or a person that shares a different religion, among others. So this classification of trust is known as the ranges of trust. So I decided to crunch the World Values Survey further. And to my surprise, I was able to find the following variables to evaluate the Philippines and Australia's ranges of trust. So there are three variables there. Then probably let's proceed to the next slide. So for localized trust, it is not surprising that Filipinos trust their family members more than Australians. But what's really interesting here is that it seems Filipinos' trust seems to fade faster for social circles in a bigger radius, like their neighbors. Can you click it? Like their neighbors and people they personally know. Interestingly, the opposite is true for Australians. Okay, for generalized trust, Filipinos exhibit low levels of trust for people of another nationality, people of another religion, and even people they met for the first time. Again, the opposite is true for Australians. Okay, so these interesting findings from the World Values Survey led me to investigate further the difference in the trusting behavior between Filipinos and Australians. So aside from crunching the survey data, I decided to implement another measure of trust through an experiment called the trust game. So the mechanics of the trust game is very simple. It's very simple. Players will be divided into two. Okay, players will be divided into two. The first mover and the second mover. So the first mover are given an initial endowment, and they will decide how much of this endowment they will transfer to the second mover. Okay, to the second mover. Note that the amount transferred by the first mover will be multiplied by 3 before the second mover receives it. Then the second mover will decide how much money that he received will be returned to the first mover. So the first mover's send rates acts as a proxy for trust, while the second mover's return rate acts as a proxy for trustworthiness. Surprisingly, actually, it's not surprisingly. I mean, we already know what happened, right? Filipino participants tend to have lower send rates than their Australian counterparts, which is consistent with the result of the World Values Survey. But of course, it's important to take note that this lab experiment has some issues and limitations, which you can read in my forthcoming paper. But moving on, what does the literature tells us about these gaps among nations' trusting behavior? So several studies pointed out the trust is diminished by income inequality. Countries with lower levels of income inequality have relatively higher trust ratings as compared to countries with severe income inequality. So for the case of the Philippines and Australia, we recorded a relatively higher Gini coefficient than Australia. So, but there is this interesting take on the relationship of trust and inequality that caught my attention. According to several literature, inequality is merely an outcome. So what really shapes a person's trusting behavior is not the outcome itself, but the perception of fairness of that outcome. So to put it simply, the literature suggests that not all types of equality is desirable. So I decided to crunch the World Value Survey again and came across this variable that asked people about their preferences on how income should be distributed. Respondents can give a score from 1 to 10, and 1 signifies a strong preference to have larger income differences, an incentive for individual effort. And 10 signifies a strong preference that income should be made more equal. It's interesting that in the case of the Philippines, it seems that across all income classes, Filipino respondents are leaning towards having larger income differences. So it only means that it seems that Filipinos in general think that effort should be rewarded with proper incentives. So again, I decided to test this in the lab by designing my very own modified trust game. So the game has 2 stages. For the first stage, players are divided into 2 groups, okay, where they are tasked to do a real effort task game. So the first group will receive payoffs based on their productivity, while the second group will receive equal payoffs based on the average performance of the group. So they were eventually asked to rate the fairness of the payoff arrangement, and then they will proceed to play the trust game. So this experiment produced very interesting results. It seems that imposing a system that promotes equality that is perceived to be unfair by the participants seems to dampen their trusting behavior, particularly Filipino participants. It's very interesting. but anyway, next slide. Why is low trusting society a terrible thing? Well, it was already discussed by Dr. Capuno. First, it increases unnecessary transaction costs like monitoring costs, bureaucratic control, among others. And then second, it intensifies social polarization, which could lead to higher crime rates. And lastly, it results in unjust markets. This particular quote from the AmBisyon Natin 2040 caught my attention because we can see how untrusting society can cultivate an unjust labor market. A low radius of trust tolerates the culture of nepotism, right? So it's a matter of whom you know rather than what you know, right? So how do we repair a low trust society like the Philippines? So of course, I don't want to sound prescriptive, but I just listed some possible ways to do it. First is we have to strengthen our existing, of course, institutions, because a strong rule of law act as a substitute for trust. And based on the 2020 Rule of Law Index released by the World Justice Project, Philippines ranked 91st out of 128 countries. So we really have to work on this one. And then we also have to promote social inclusion by having policy interventions that will cultivate a fairer system, not just by redistributing wealth, but also by making opportunities accessible for all. So in addition, we also have to prevent all kinds of discrimination to achieve a genuine social inclusion. So we also need to uphold accountability and transparency. Our system should ensure that even powerful people can't act with impunity. And we also need to encourage citizen engagement, educate the public about the issues besetting the country, and make them feel that they are part of the solution process. And lastly, and this is my personal favorite, we have to rethink existing systems that are based on competition. I mean, particularly in our education sector, in other countries, they already abandoned the idea of ranking primary school children based on their academic performance. like in Japan. To be honest, ranking your students, ranking young students based on learning outcomes seems to send the wrong message that in order for you to be on top, someone has to lose. It's problematic to treat learning as a competition with others, especially for young kids. Because after all, life in general is not a zero-sum game. So to end my presentation, let me share this quote from Frederick Douglass: "Trust is the foundation of society. Where there is no truth, there can be no trust. And where there is no trust, there can be no society." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. For someone who was frisked through the metal detector earlier, I can certainly see your points. So the third speaker is a stalwart in the DPWH. He's Secretary Rogelio Babe Singson, who is currently the President and Chief Executive Officer of Metro Pacific Water. He is also the President of MPW subsidiaries. He's currently the President of the Management Association of the Philippines and also currently serves as a member of the Board of Trustees of De La Salle University. Prior to joining Metro Pacific Water, he served as the President and Chief Executive Officer of Meralco Powergen Corporation and Light Rail Manila Corporation, or LRT1. He completed a full 6-year term from 2010 to 2016 as Secretary of the Department of Public Works and Highways, where he led the Good Governance and Anti-Corruption Program and the implementation of major infrastructure projects nationwide. In June 2016, he was conferred the Order of Lacandula with the rank of Grand Cross, Bayani. During his stint in government, he received other significant awards and recognitions, including, I hope I say this right, the Outstanding Exemplar in Government Service Award from Bulong Pulungan, Lifetime Distinguished Achievement Award from the UP Alumni Association, and the Outstanding Manilan Award for Public Service. He was one of the recipients of the Outstanding Filipino Awards for Government Public Service and was named the most distinguished alumnus by the UP Alumni Engineers in November 2011. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from the University of the Philippines, and he's also a covenanted member of Ang Ligay ng Panginoon community. We're honored to have Secretary Singson to speak before us.
Thank you so much for that generous introduction. And good morning to everyone, especially those who ventured to be present this morning, as well as those attending online. I was asked, unfortunately, I was hoping I could greet Secretary Balisacan happy birthday. It was his birthday yesterday, but obviously he had to attend the more important budget hearing. I was asked to share my views on how to build and strengthen trust between public and private sectors and have a meaningful partnership, and in turn help achieve the country's economic development goals in AmBisyon Natin 2040. Just for context, quality infrastructure development and BOT, PPP mode of implementation has been very much part of my professional and personal advocacies all these years, both during my private and public sector assignments. So personally, I fully understand the difficult challenges and intricacies of undertaking the planning, the development, approval processes, and execution of significant infrastructure development projects from both the government side and the public sector side, government and the private sector. Having used the PPP, or originally it was known as the BOT law model in the conversion of baselands as BCDA, development of Fort Bonifacio Global City, implementation of various toll roads, school buildings, water concessions, and even the Heritage Memorial Park. From the MAP business sector's view, last July 2022, the MAP identified 8 priority areas that we submitted to the incoming President Bongbong Marcos Jr. And among these include the government should focus on basic education, health, quality health care, infrastructure, investments, livelihood, food security, ease of doing business, particularly the development of medium and small scale and micro enterprises. And as mentioned, very important, rule of law, good governance, accountability, and transparency. Now, let me focus on my area of responsibility, and I would consider my advocacy in the infrastructure. We felt that infrastructure was needed as a major economic driver for our country's development and global competitiveness. There's no doubt about it. And this included in our paper, the development, energy development and sufficiency, digital transformation and infrastructure, water adequacy and sustainability, and for government, this is important, to provide an attractive PPP policy environment. So let me focus on that particular key component of an attractive policy environment as a critical ingredient to encourage private investments for our country's much needed underdeveloped infrastructure industry. Can we have my first slide, please? One basic issue to resolve by government is whether it will consider any PPP or BOT project, whether it's not going to be a fit-all. Some projects may be good as revenue measures, but some will just have to be undertaken as public service. Government has to decide. Does it want a huge upfront concession fee? Is that where the winner will be selected? Whoever pays the highest concession fee? Or do you just want it undertaken by the private sector so that you take it out of the government resource allocation? Obviously, if you ask for a high concession fee, the bearer of that high concession fee would be the users. So you have to decide, can the users take on all of the high concession fees that the government is asking? To me, that is a very basic consideration. I'm happy it was mentioned as part of the confidence building, the amendment to the implementing rules and regulations of the amended BOT law was passed last October 10, making the IRR more investor-friendly, improving the risk sharing, as well as all the other provisions that will make it more attractive to the private sector. This was welcomed by MAP and some 29 other business groups and joint foreign chambers. Another important area is to clarify the roles and responsibilities of the various agencies in the approval and review process. You cannot imagine a big project being held by a barangay captain because of a permit. And that happens. So we have to define clearly the approval process. On the part of the private sector, we would like to see more convergence programs among the infrastructure agencies of government to ensure efficient use of government resources and the full benefit of the project to the Filipino people. Some of these infrastructure projects that can be undertaken either as pure PPP or hybrid projects are airports, seaports, roroports, mass transport system, power distribution, reclamation projects, public markets at the LGU levels, central bus terminals, water supply and distribution, and wastewater treatment systems, and in some countries, even jail management. We would like to reduce the red tape and increase the threshold amount of projects for review of government. It used to be, I believe, 300 million, everything had to go to an interagency body. I'm hearing and hope it is correct that 5 million and below will no longer have to go through the interagency body or even to NEDA. I would like to also focus to a particular sector. Allow me at this point to just focus on a particular sector which has become top of mind and a worldwide sustainability concern, the water crisis. If people don't realize that we have a water crisis, I don't know where you've been in these last few years. Addressing the water crisis would be a good template for public-private sector partnership and collaboration. What are the major issues in the water crisis? There is a lack of clear vision and clarity of roles, again, as I mentioned, roles and responsibilities to address the lack of sustainable water supply for the country, mainly due to our latest count, as close or as many as 30 agencies doing their thing in the water sector. I think NEDA is aware of this, PPP Center is aware of this, and we need clarity. Who is the regulator? Who is the developer? Who is going to mandate the KPIs or key result areas for these operators in the private sector? The country has been blessed with more than enough yearly rainfall, and it's getting even more severe. Yet, we're not able to maximize this surface water on our major rivers. Instead, too much or severe rainfall causes very high turbidity for our water supply sources, reducing the amount of available potable water supply. For those staying in Metro Manila, we always hear this: Angat's water supply is overflowing, and therefore it is causing a lot of turbidity in our water treatment. So they have to give some downtime to replenish or to increase, to reduce the turbidity before it goes to your faucets. Farmlands are also washed away, okay, by excessive rainfall. Bottom line, we cannot address maximizing water resources by political jurisdictions. There is a tendency to divide. For example, Cagayan River runs from Cordillera all the way to Cagayan. You cannot address that by political jurisdictions and municipalities. It has to be addressed as a whole river basin system, from the watershed to increasing capacity to coastal management. This is what we mean when we say the government has to adopt an integrated water resources management policy and principles. I think there's common agreement that this has to be done if we want to maximize our water resources, reduce flooding, reduce loss of lives and public and private property. I was surprised to see that in the last, there was a study that showed as much as, or as many as 800 lives are lost due to flooding every year. Let's not mention the destruction to public and private properties, including infrastructure, that exacerbates our lack of infrastructure in the countryside. The government, the question is, do we have enough resources? My answer is yes. DPWH alone, I hope nobody's here from DPWH, but I can take responsibility over this statement. DPWH alone, in the past, when during my time, we had about 100 billion in flood control alone. My latest information is they have over 200 billion pesos in flood control programs alone. I'm not talking about roads, bridges, all other projects, flood control. If I were to be asked, slice 10% of that and use it as your counterpart and access concessional ODA financing. So your 10, 20 billion can generate as much as 100 billion, and you can do several of the river basin projects that I am advocating. One example of such a river basin project is what was undertaken, and it will be completed soon, the one in the multipurpose dam in Halaur, Iloilo. A multipurpose dam that is going to provide enough potable water for Iloilo City and the 7 municipalities around Iloilo, plus enough irrigation for the whole province of Iloilo and even a hydropower project. How much did that cost? 10 billion over 4 years. So 2.5 billion every year. How much is the budget that I said that could be available? 100 billion. You can do all of the major river basins when we finish 2028. My final suggestion is, as I mentioned earlier, is to reduce the review process by increasing the threshold of what will be reviewed. I think there are many opportunities for the private sector to proceed, provided the environment is good enough, risk sharing is there, and responsibilities are clear. We don't want to be held hostage. I just heard recently the second major supply for Metro Manila in Kaliwa Dam took 8 years for government to get its own approval from another government agency. We're not even talking of the private sector entering the field. It's still between 2 government agencies. So as I said, the horrors are there. The red tape is still very much in there. And if you have enough red tape, corruption creeps in. Finally, the close collaboration. Well, I think I don't want to miss this last point. The PPP policy has to be very clear in terms of roles and responsibilities, risk sharing, and most importantly, the certainty and sanctity of contracts of government. It has to be predictable. Otherwise, no private sector, local or foreign, will take on PPP projects. The predictability of contracts. What are the provisions of those contracts, the terms of reference, particularly the embedded tariff adjustments have to be respected. Otherwise, you don't respect the sanctity of these PPP contracts, which is to the private sector a very important component. So again, the close collaboration, coordination, and fair treatment of both the public and the private sector is essential and crucial if we are to achieve our AmBisyon Natin 2040. I would like to reiterate to the NEDA staff and to Undersecretary Kapunan our full support to NEDA to ensure that we develop a more just and humane society for all Filipinos, especially to your target bottom 40 poor and marginalized who are most affected by economic disturbances and poor government service. Thank you very much and good morning.
Thank you so much, Secretary Singson. Good job, PES. The stars have aligned. We have the private sector and the Undersecretary for Investment over here. I hope you have sideline meetings after this one. So I would just like to call on the 3 presenters, Yusek Capuno, Professor Arapok, and Secretary Singson to join me here. So in the interest of time, we're quite hungry. This is the Session de Peligro. Okay, so I would just like to open up the discussion first to participants here in the room. If you have questions, table 3, please identify yourself and ask your questions to any of the panelists. Thank you.
Hello.
Alexis Mike.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello. Alexis Kucha here again, PES President 2005. I have a comment and a question for Secretary Babes. And I'd like to put Yusek Capuno in a hot seat for a while. Secretary Babes, you have my highest admiration In the first few months of your term as DPWH Secretary, you had a presentation to the FEF, where the Foundation for Economic Freedom, where you mentioned that part of the corruption process in DPWH was yung mga district engineers, china-chop-chop yung mga projects. So instead of them getting approval at the national level, they get their own, and then they bid it out, no, which makes for a lot of, well, decentralized corruption, at the same time a lot of inefficiencies and many times incomplete projects. And I believe you had a very good plan to sort of integrate that. I'm relating it to the last line of your presentation where you said, increasing the thresholds for national approval. Is that related in a way, or that's a different issue?
It's actually the same. Thank you for that question. Actually, because before I came in, 20 million was given the authority to the district engineer. 50 million to the regional director, and everything above that went to the central office. So that's the reason why they chop so that it stays within their level of authority.
So what is the higher threshold that you're proposing?
We went all the way up to 200 million to the regional.
And you want to even go beyond that now?
I'm not sure what happened after that, but if I remember right, regional could go all the way to 250 million. So that the tendency, because especially with the inflation today, 20 million is not even 1 kilometer of good roads. So you'll have 3 different contractors doing a stretch of 5 kilometers. That's not going to work. You'll have very poor quality in between those contractors. So the review process in government, you know how it is. It is a very tedious process, and the responsibilities get muddled up. Who is at the end of the day going to be responsible for the integrity of an infrastructure project? The one I was mentioning earlier, between one agency and another government agency, it took them 8 years to get an approval. And it's as if that project was not critical. It is a second source of water supply for Metro Manila. 97% of our water supply comes from Angat. If anything happens in Angat, we're dead. We're short of water. So we need that second source very, very badly.
Okay. You mentioned only water, but energy is also another issue where there's a probable critical shortage in the next 5 years. But I will not ask you that. I'll go to my question for Yusek Jokoy. I'm a bit jaded having seen the last 5 Philippine development plans. And it's just an interpolation, of course, of the target per capita. And pardon my use of the term, it's still all a lot of motherhood statements, no? Which we can all read in the volume. My question is this. If you pin down the key issues talaga that are really, number 1 is nutrition. We are supposed to have a demographic dividend that's supposed to last until 2088, where the percentage of our population in the working age is growing, even way past India. But there are 2 items that are militating against it. Number 1 is the quality of nutrition. And food inflation is a big factor in the deterioration of that nutrition. Kung stunted na sila mentally from age 3, kahit anong resources ibigay mo sa kanila sa Department of Education, hindi nadudunong yun. They will not become productive workers. They will become burdens to society, at best, unskilled workers, at worst, criminals and drug addicts. I don't see any part of the problem of the program that specifically addresses that. And I'm disheartened that our Secretary of Education would rather focus on restoring ROTC instead of addressing this issue.
Let me try to answer that very quickly. The MAP has focused precisely on basic education and malnutrition, even at the infancy stage.
Yes,
Because as you said, you don't wait until they're already stunted.
yes,
Okay, so I fully agree. Basic education and malnutrition have to be addressed if we want to get out of our education crisis.
yes. The second part of that is we go by Jeffrey Sachs' book on ladders of poverty. Di ba? The key is to let the poor go first to the first rung of poverty, and then they're able to pull themselves up. I don't see, again, very specific things, whether in the nutrition, education, or the intervention to make sure that happens. Kasi for example, klarong-klaro na, we rank lowest in terms of the basic arithmetic, mathematics, and English skills. And the first reaction of the DepEd before was to even deny or even poo-poo the results of the exam instead of saying, oh, we have a real problem. Again, the combination of lack of nutrition, the combination of having very poor skills. Kahit yung BPOs natin, they have to retrain college graduates.
Again, no, if I may, no, I'm sorry, I'm not with government today. Okay, I don't want to answer for NEDA, but in the private sector, we want a targeted bottom 40% of
Yes,
the poor has to be
exactly.
addressed
Yes.
if we want to move to our next economic level.
Yes.
You have to address even our CSRs. We say, how are you targeting your CSR programs? Are you addressing it to the bottom poor or to the already moneyed and middle class?
Yes.
We have to address to the bottom 40% marginalized and poor for all of these services that government has to be doing well. I'll let
Thank you,
NEDA-
Secretary Bay. She should have stayed in
Yusek
government.
Capuno.
But this is a challenge to NEDA, no? Kasi, pardon my being jaded about this. Unless we really have some very strong priorities about 1, 2, 3, a 5-year plan is just a plan that could just go in a bookshelf and nobody refers to it again. Pardon. So I put that out as a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. May I call you Alex and Secretary Roger Singson. Yeah. We do realize that malnutrition, stunting, and all the other effects of malnutrition on cognitive development and eventually completion of schooling and then performance in the labor market are a serious problem. It undermines our, the dividends we expect from our young labor force, young population. Now, we do have a lots of intervention that will, in the PDP, this is shaping up now. We do have a lot of proposed intervention to address that, but probably not written up in the way siguro na you were expecting. Na halimbawa, okay, our number one problem is malnutrition. It's not written up that way. But certainly, we have to work on how to communicate, the different parts of the programs and projects that we include in the PDP to address, halimbawa, ang usapan is malnutrition. Where are those interventions in the PDP? Who's the assigned agency and what outcomes are really expected? Just recently, I was asked by there is actually an ongoing project or soon to be started project by the DSWD and the DOH, specifically to beef up our anti-malnutrition drive. Meron ganon, nandun yun. It's just not written up siguro the way more responsive to the questions being raised by the private sector and other advocates. If I may just relate to what Secretary Singson was mentioning about the PPP arrangements. Yeah? It's one of those marching orders that the secretary gave me when he asked me to join NEDA, you know, we have to improve the ICC approval process. Second is we have to revise the IRR. We managed to address many of the most important issues raised by the private sector in the revised IRR, except for the threshold, because that is written in the original law, which the IRR cannot amend. So what we're trying to do now is to amend the law itself in Congress. So that's the next step. Sad to say, wala tayong magagawa dyan. It's not within our powers, the executive, to amend the law. With regards naman dun sa, you were saying, I forgot. Mamaya siguro, babalik. A sanctity of contracts is there. We remove the MAGA provisions. We're allowing for international arbitration. And then we have pre-specified the key parameters, terms, and conditions. When we bid out proposals, or when you submit unsolicited proposals, we list down the key parameters and conditions that we expect. And then we're working very closely with the PPCP Center and DOF Privatization Group and NEDA to come up with one set of findings X days after the proponent has submitted it to us. So then you have to talk to each of these agencies. We have agreed, you know, to consolidate all the reports, then that's it. And then just recently, the cabinet met to approve the ICC guidelines for the IRR. Sabi nila, ang sa amin kasi very conservative kami. We will have it approved by X number of days. Sabi ng cabinet, no, X minus 20 days. So that's our standing order now. So, I mean, not in 20 days, but you know, the original proposal minus, meaning the shorter period. So we expect, you know, a quicker evaluation and response and approval or disapproval, as the case may be, as we go along.
Yusek, as I said, we're offering the MAP committees to use as a sounding board, you know, because the most difficult thing is an agency all of a sudden issues the terms of reference even without consulting the possible players. Okay, so, and then you go through a long review and at the end of the day, you don't have any bidder. No? So we hope that before the final terms of reference are issued by the national or government agency that will execute the project, that it be vetted. No? Or is this okay with the potential investors? Are there any suggestions? How do we make this even more acceptable? Are the terms and conditions and so on acceptable, no? Before it is finally issued? That's what I used to do before issuing any project for PPP. I call the big players as well as those who are interested to come and have a dialogue before we make a final issuance, particularly in the KRAs, no? The KPIs. No? What are the KPIs that are acceptable? Can you live with these KPIs? Including the parametric formula, no, over a 25-year period.
Thank you. We'll go to the next question. I remind the one who asked the question to keep it short.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Kei Otsuka from Japan. I'm interested in Professor Arapo's presentation about trust. Of course, Japan is a country of trust. And in terms of the quality of human capital, Japan should belong to middle-income class, middle-income group. Actually, Japan belongs to the high-income group because of the high trust and low cost. There are many opinions as to why Japanese have a lot of trust. One of the most plausible hypotheses, a long time ago, people lived in the mountainous areas, they share the irrigation water in a cooperative fashion. And it was Toyota who brought that idea to the factory management. And Toyota, in order to build one Toyota car, there are about 20,000 companies involved. There are a lot of small parts suppliers, but they are, they work in a very harmonious way. And the key to the success is the so-called Japanese management system called Kaizen. China has completely adopted Kaizen. The Vietnam is adopting, Thailand has almost adopted, India is running a lot now, Ethiopia is introducing, South Africa is introducing, but not in the Philippines. And this trust is extremely important for industrialization. There was a discussion about industrialization today, but for successful industrialization, trust is a key. And for that, I think Filipino may think about Japanese management system much seriously than before. Thank you.
Let me add to Otsuka Sensei's points. So, do you think what are the low-hanging fruits for us to cultivate trust as a country? So, just to synthesize all this.
Actually, we really have to change our education system, because that I think Japan's model in their education system really fosters cooperation in the primary level, because they really they abandon the top 10, the competition among students, because the problem is that we always have that kind of system that we think we can achieve efficiency through competition. One good example would be, I'm talking about the academe. It seems that we don't really, the trust among institutions, among tertiary education, tertiary institutions is not that strong. For example, some disciplines are very cliquish in terms of research. They don't involve SUCs, and in order for them to be good as well, you have to involve them. But it seems that some disciplines are very cliquish. So I think the same thing is true in the primary level. Remove that competition mindset, because again, not all, some systems might work for competition, but in achieving a societal goal, we might have to change that mindset, and we can start at the primary level.
Well, media, do you think it has?
Of course, media plays a very important role as well. Right now, we're having, as academics, we're having problems. What I call this, telling the truth. Telling the truth about our disciplines, because right now we all know that social media plays a very important role in information dissemination, and people cannot really decipher good information and bad information. So I think that's another challenge for us. So for media, I can't really think of a possible way that on how media could improve the trust level in the society. But probably, yeah, we can work on that one. But right now, I can't think of any possible intervention for media.
That's a good topic for Usapang Econ.
Yeah, probably.
Mahar, it's Mahar, yeah. Mahar.
Thank you. Mangahas, I was also a PES president, but I forgot already when. Maybe it was 1990 or something. I'm addressing this to NEDA, RC, through Daoy, because you're here. And I have a short and simple proposal, which is statistics-based. And that is, in preparing the plan, would you consider incorporating what we informally call the gainers losers indicator? This is the indicator of whether more people are getting better off than are getting worse off compared to last year. Right? That's actually a very, very old survey indicator. Very, very old, but which the government started at last to use, or the BSP only, in the last 5 or 6 years. And fortunately, within this last 5 or 6 years, it even became positive. that more people were getting better off than were getting worse off, which did not happen so much in the last 30 years. Right? In the last 30 years, it hardly happened that more people got better off than worse off, despite the regular increase in the per capita GNP, of course. But it started happening about 2014, 15, 16, 17. It started happening. So nice. And this we had from our own statistics. And the BSP began to collect it also. This is in its consumer expectation survey, right? Which tallies with our survey, right? So why don't you use it? Why don't you test yourselves as to whether or not people are getting better off in excess of the people getting worse off, and include it in your planning, and include it in your quarterly appraisal of the effectivity of the plan and of the government programs. Just use it. Just like every quarter you check on the per capita GNP. Every quarter, why don't you check on the gainers minus losers rate? Because you have it, right? It's not something I'm imposing. We just happen, we SWS, we just happen to have been collecting it since the 1980s. So I can show you a very, very long time series. But now the government has the same time series. And they track with each other. They're consistent. I think if you would use this, then you would have proof of whether people are getting better off more than getting worse off. So why not? It's there, it's in your toolkit if you want to use it. That's and you know what you can easily do? The BSP is not doing it. You tabulate it at least by education. Now, when we tabulate it by education, it's very strongly biased with higher education. If you really want more gainers, you've got to have a lot of gainers, at least in the elementary graduate, high and junior high school category, or else it will not happen. Just tabulated by education. Secondly, tabulated by area. If we do this, when we do this, it's the NCR area that's always got the most. And then the balance Luzon. It is very weak in Visayas and Mindanao. How about making sure that it also happens in Visayas, Mindanao? Oh, and I have a last suggestion. Because the BSP is not doing this. The BSP is only getting NCR and areas outside of NCR. Huh? Hindi lang nilalabas. Ay, nako. That's one of my complaints about governments got statistics, hindi nilalabas. Ay, nako, why don't we test with each other? Meron kaming Visayas and Mindanao. And anyway, I could say, ang hina-hina sa Visayas and Mindanao. Parang yung mga gainers, or do you find that also? Okay. So you agree with me. Ang gainers rate is highest in NCR and Balance Luzon. Mahina dun sa South. Ayun. Ipakita nyo din sa amin lahat. Huh? But how about education? You have tabulation by education? Oh, ganun din ba, no? Hindi it's against the lower educational groups. Hindi ba? Oh, so just use that. And then you will have a way of monitoring if people are getting better off or getting worse. So ang dali-dali lang. And it's already in your toolkit. It's already in your data kit.
Faith, may work program ka na.
No, yung pala meron silang data, hindi lang pinapalabas. And that's one of my issues also with the PSA. May mga data na hindi nilalabas pero nandyan. In fact, I'm finding it out only indirectly kasi nakikita ko, napapansin ko, ay nasa ADB at nasa World Bank. Pero wala sa amin. Right? Please do not discriminate against the local researchers. Ayan na lang. Maraming pong salamat.
Dokoy, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I have my access to grind as well. Yeah. So my previous life as a researcher. Thank you for those suggestions, Dr. Mangahas. This is what I can do. This is it's within my group in NEDA that is tasked to develop what we call the 6-year M&E agenda. The idea is to produce M&E results that will feed into the planning naman. M&E, monitoring and evaluation. Yeah? So kasi meron tayong mga M&E ngayon hindi nakasync sa PDP planning. What we're trying to do now is to put it in sync. Kasi yung evaluation results, monitoring results should plan into the next, in the planning cycle. May proper placement yan. So that's what we're doing now. And specifically, we're going to organize an M&E forum on November 28th. We're going to invite your group, BSP group, to talk more about these gainers and losers indicators. If I have the authority to invite you, I approve those proposals and all that. So you might as well tell me yes or no now whether you can participate or not. But yeah, sure. Okay, so we'll carve out a special session for that. Now to BSP. I'm aware that you have this the confidence surveys, consumer confidence or business confidence surveys. When I had a lot of time in the past 2 years, during the pandemic, I requested for those data, only to be told possibly 6 or 7 months later that you're not sharing them because of confidentiality. I mean, I'm not asking for the names. I want anonymized data. I'm not going to use those, and yet, but okay lang yun. But I was only belatedly told after, getting so excited all about it that I cannot use it. Ang ganda-ganda pa naman sana nung topic na ipuproduce ko. But, now I undersecretary, lagot kayo. Don't ever propose anything. No, that's just a joke. Yeah, but as I've said, that M&E forum would be an opportunity for you guys to, to let us know what you have and how we can use it for at least for monitoring purposes to feed into the PDP planning cycle.
Yeah, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. Time is short, but our capacity for discussion and further conversation is much longer. So in behalf of the Philippine Economic Society, I would like to thank everyone who have participated in here and also to our panel, very distinguished panel. It's been a dynamic discussion and we look forward to the discussions over lunch, which is more exciting.